work at a gas station. It's 3 a.m., and this guy keeps insisting that I come outside to help him with the gas pump. Quick backstory. I work at a gas station on the main route. We see a lot of travelers passing through. Only one person works each shift, and it's a 24-hour store. We're short-staffed, so I agreed to an overnight. I'm female. I work in a state that's always had self-serve gas stations. So this guy comes in. I ask him if he needs any help, and he says no. He's getting gas at the pump but needs to use the bathroom. I go back to work on whatever invoices we got yesterday. The guy uses the bathroom and then goes back outside. About 5 to 7 minutes later, he comes back inside and tells me that he's confused about the pump. He directly says, "You might have to come outside to help me." Customers don't often say this. They usually just complain that it's not working, so I'm already feeling weird about this guy. I shake it off because he looks like a nerd and I don't feel afraid of him anyway. I look at the register to see what error it came up with for his pump, and there were none. The register doesn't even say the pump is in use. Even if someone tries to pay and nothing's wrong with their payment, it will at least say payment or loyalty timed out, but it literally had no sign of him trying to use it before asking me for help. I ask him if he just wants to pay inside. He agrees to. He gets his wallet out of his car and then pays $10. I give him his receipt and he says, "Can you help me? I don't understand the machine." And I say, "We aren't really allowed to leave the store during overnight shifts, as it's just me here, and it's not safe to go outside." I don't know why I told him I was alone, but he wasn't seemingly threatening. He proceeds to say, "I don't know what it's asking me. I need help. I'm not scary." I tell him again that I can't go outside because it's a store policy for the overnight shift, and say, "It's not that you're scary, I just can't go outside." I would have to tell a little old lady asking for help at this hour the same thing. Which is true. We can't even take the trash out during overnights. He starts to walk away from the register counter now, but then stops at the door and asks me one last time to come outside and help him. I'm pretty annoyed at this point. I've said no twice now. I'm not going, so stop asking. I finally say in a super annoyed tone, "Okay, all you need to do is 1. Pick up the nozzle, 2. Select fuel grade button, and 3. Put it into your tank and squeeze the handle. I'm not going outside." Then he finally goes back to the car, and the register tells me he had no trouble pumping gas. Also, his plates seem like they're from the state that I work in. This kind of thing wouldn't make me suspicious usually, but the fact that he originally opted for me to go outside at 3 a.m. is weird, along with how he didn't bother to use the pump before he came inside to ask for help, claiming it wasn't working, and him not taking my no for an answer. Don't open the door. I've never really told this story, at least not completely, but it's something that I still think about from time to time. It kind of haunts me. I used to work as a manager of a fast food place in a rather seedy part of a medium-sized city. I had worked at the nicer location until they decided to transfer me, and there were rumors that the location I ended up getting sent to was going to be shut down, which did end up happening a few years after I finally left. Anyway, the point is that the place wasn't being well taken care of. The dining room was dated and old. The owners were certainly not updating or maintaining the place well at all. They were just barely maintaining the very basic safety requirements, and sometimes they weren't even doing that. For instance, I often worked the closing shift, which for this location at the time was 4 p.m. to midnight. Between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m., it was me running the drive-thru and front counter by myself, and one employee running the kitchen. At 11 p.m., that other employee would go home, and I was left by myself to tidy up and do the deposit between 11 p.m. and 12 a.m. This isn't really safe, and I'm not sure it was even entirely legal at the time. This was over a decade ago, so who knows. Just to provide a little context and background here, I'm a girl, but I'm not what you would consider small. I'm 6 foot, and during this time, I think people would probably say I came across as more than a little stern. I was younger, but I'd already spent years working in fast food, getting treated like crap by customers and having drinks and food thrown at me. The location I worked at was a swarm with junkies and drug dealers, and just general scary behavior. All this to say, I didn't get ruffled that easily, and I took a lot of things in stride. However, on this night, I was working the night shift with a new guy. The new guy had probably been working there for no more than a few weeks. I'd worked with him a few times before, but never the closing shift. And from the first time I met him, I'd always gotten a strange vibe from him. And again, at that time, I wasn't someone who got ruffled easily. Prior to this, I worked with a night janitor at the other location who had some addiction problems and rather unpredictable and scary rage problem. And some creepy kid who barely spoke more than 2 words at a time. And when he did, it was always something about how much he disliked women, and me in particular. But this guy, this new dude, he was a whole different level of weird. He had a kid and professed to be a single father. He brought the kid around during the day, and the kid and his clothing were always really dirty. Like, really dirty. And not only that, but the kid also occasionally had bruises on his head and arms. The kid was a toddler, and I knew that toddlers can get into things. But one look at that kid, and I knew that those bruises were not just from a little kid messing around. I never saw the new guy behave aggressively towards his kid at all, but I don't know. It was just a feeling. He was a medium-height, stocky young guy. He was totally average in every way, but he just had a vibe about him. He was always friendly, never rude or aggressive, but his eyes were just lifeless. Anyway, on this night, I think he might have been called in to cover a shift for somebody else. I was in charge of making the schedules most of the time, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have scheduled him to work at closing with me since I found him so off-putting. The first part of the night was fairly normal. I ran the drive-thru and the front counter, and he ran the kitchen between 8 and 11 p.m. He was talking to me, on and off between orders, telling me about his ex and how he'd come to be a single father. Apparently the mother of his child had a drug problem. In hindsight, I think a lot of what he said was meant to garner sympathy. He really laid the troubled tale of him and his son on thick, but at the time, I just felt a little bad for both of them, especially his kid, who I suspected was being abused. But despite being seen as stern, I was definitely still young and still naive when it came to manipulative people. He told me that he moved to the city and immediately had trouble finding work prior to getting the job at the place we worked at. He said he'd been running out of money and was behind on rent, bills, and didn't have any formula for his son. At the time, I think I just empathized with him that it sucked. We were both working at fast food, and I thought it was obvious that neither of us had any money. The place was bare bones and minimum wage, and I was barely getting by with 3 roommates, and pretty much only eating the free meal I was given from the restaurant every day. Anyway, people tended to ramble when working the late shift, and I got used to listening to people spontaneously talk about their personal problems. I had a habit of just listening and not really reciprocating the sharing, and I guess this didn't really go over very well with the new guy. At some point, he said something to the effect of, "You don't talk much, do you? I'm telling you my whole life story here and you've got nothing to say." I don't know if it was just that I was coming across as unsympathetic, or more likely, that he was frustrated that he wasn't successfully manipulating me into giving up personal details about myself. As far as I was concerned, he was just someone I was working with and I didn't know him. And I really didn't want him to know me. And certainly, I wasn't about to start telling him anything that wasn't surface level chit-chat. But the guy was really intimidating. Something about his tone was off. It definitely wasn't a jokey accusation or off-the-cuff comment. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I remember that I just tried to play it off somehow. He didn't say anything more about it, but after that, the silence between us seemed a little tense. At 11 p.m., it was time for him to go home. The normal procedure was that the kitchen closer would tidy their area and an actual kitchen cleaner would come in a few hours later to deep clean things. In our case, it was a husband and wife team who did several locations, but they didn't usually come in until a few hours after I left. So this guy was only tasked with a basic tidy, and then I would let him out. After which, I would stay behind to prepare for the deposit. But instead of this happening smoothly, this guy goes into the staff bathroom and stays there for a long time, like almost 20 minutes or something. I did not know what was going on, nor did I know exactly how to handle the situation. It had honestly never happened before. People usually couldn't wait to get home. Was he sick? Did he fall asleep? I don't know, but I honestly just wanted to get my work done and go home. He finally emerged and quickly walked to the door and left. I was relieved. It was weird, but I just shrugged it off and hurried back to the office to get done what I needed to get done. Not even 10 minutes later, I start to hear a banging at the back door of the restaurant. Loud, repeated banging. Normally, I would ignore this. The back door faced an alley and was right next to a street full of bars and pubs. People leaving the bars and pubs often got the idea that banging on the door would get them after-hour food service because, well, they were drunk. So this wasn't exactly uncommon. I just ignored it and kept hurrying to get things done. But the banging did not stop, and it somehow just seemed to get louder and louder and more urgent. So I finally got up and went to look out the peephole to see who was there. At this point, I was definitely on edge, and this edginess swelled into a full-out anxiety attack when I see that it's the new guy standing at the back door. Now, my first thought was to not open the door. I really didn't want to open the door, but I knew that he knew that I was in there. What if he forgot something inside? What if it was his house keys, car keys, or something? I was going to have to leave the building by that same door at some point, so there really seemed to be no escaping him. Reluctantly and very stupidly, I opened the door. What I opened the door to was, quite frankly, terrifying to me. He said he left his jacket, or his keys maybe, I can't remember. And I told him to tell me where and I'd go get them. I didn't want him to come inside. If this had been any other person I worked with regularly, this would be no big deal. I'd let them back in, let them get whatever they left behind and they'd take off. But I instinctively knew I didn't want this dude back inside, in the dark, empty restaurant with me. But new dude was not having it. He pushed past me and said he'd get it himself. Then he proceeded to shut himself in the bathroom again. And at this point, I just panicked. Instead of just staying there by the door, which in hindsight I should have, I rushed back to the office. I'd left some of the cash I was counting for the deposit out. Question: what dummy would answer the back door at night at all, and especially with the till out? Well, this girl, I guess. This dumb girl. I managed to stuff the cash in the safe and lock it before he came to find me. The office was dark, and the air conditioner was on full blast, but this dude was sweating a lot. I was taller than him, and I'm not a small girl, but somehow, I just knew that this guy was about to hurt me. As I watched his eyes start around the office, I grabbed my jacket hanging on the hook next to me. I hadn't finished my deposit, but I was getting out of there. I didn't care how much shit I might get into in the morning for not having all my work done. I smiled and told him that I was just leaving and that he could walk me out. I was really just trying to not show my panic. Whatever he had planned, I wanted to give him an out for him to rethink it. So I smiled, grabbed my purse, and started to move towards the door. New guy who was standing in the doorway didn't budge though. He started talking about his son, about the money trouble he'd been having, and capped the whole story off with a request for a loan. From the tone of his voice, it was clear this was not a loan. He was demanding money from me. He said he would pay me back as soon as he got paid, and that I'd be really helping him out. I didn't know what to do. He had me trapped. I wasn't leaving the office or the building unless he allowed it. So, I gave him money from my wallet, $50 I think. When I gave it to him, he said, "Thanks, you're really helping me and my son out. I won't forget it." But when he said it, he had no expression, no smile, no speech effect at all. He didn't seem grateful or even relieved, just dead eyes, arms limp at his sides. It was terrifying. To this day, I don't remember how I got him to the door. All I remember was shutting the door behind him, making sure the door was securely locked, and rushing into the office to burst into tears. I didn't finish my work, but I stayed in there until I could force myself to leave out of the same door. I was sure he was going to jump me when I left. The thought never occurred to me to call the cops. I don't know why. I guess I just felt like nothing serious had happened yet. He asked me for money, and I willingly gave it to him, despite the fact that I felt I had no choice and had been scared shitless. I only saw him one more time after that, but neither of us ever mentioned that night or the money. Pretty quickly after that, he stopped showing up to his shifts, and I never saw him again. I don't believe in throwing words like psychopath around, but I can say that there was definitely something about this guy that was just wrong. I'd smile, he'd smile. I'd frown, he'd frown. It was almost like talking to someone pantomiming emotions. But even talking about this story now, or even thinking about it, makes me feel just as uncomfortable as I did the day it happened. I like to believe that the reason this new guy stopped showing up was because he got arrested for child abuse, and his kid was placed with a family who loved the shit out of him. Maybe that didn't happen, but that's what I like to believe. Something's off with the new guy. I was reading a story that reminded me of an event from over 20 years ago. In the second half of 1998, I had taken a job as a security guard at a plant that made locks. Being a kid, I usually worked one of three shifts: 4 p.m. to 12 a.m., 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m., or 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. The 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. shift was for extra coverage, so there were always two of us there from 7:30 to midnight. It was a routine, boring job for the most part. We did our rounds, logged anything out of the ordinary, and watched a tiny monitor displaying the CCTV feed. Things went by in an almost painfully normal manner for 6 months. I worked, saved, bought a car, and planned to move. By late March of '99, I served my notice and prepared to move cross-country. A new hire was brought in to fill my spot, a soft-spoken man named Calvin. As part of his training, Calvin spent time working at all hours. At night, he was a shadow, working with myself and the other guard, getting a feel for the plant's nocturnal routines. Most nights, he worked with myself and Amira, a female guard who was around my age. I was 18 at the time. Calvin, who was about a decade older, was quiet and polite, though something seemed to be missing. There's a spark that genuinely nice people seem to have, and he didn't possess it. Whenever he went on rounds with me, he'd ask questions about the job and make small talk. I had noticed that he was a little odd, laughing at odd times and changing his tone mid-sentence. At the time, I chalked it up to him being awkward. That wouldn't last. One night, near the end of his first week, he went on rounds with Amira. When they returned to the office, I knew something was wrong. Normally talkative, she would barely say a word. Not sure what had occurred. I waited until Calvin went to the restroom to ask. During their trip, everything had been normal until they reached the brass mill, a portion of the plant that shut down at 6 p.m. There were usually no employees there after that time, and no lights. They were making their way to a checkpoint on the landing atop a flight of stairs when the mood shifted. She told me that she turned around only to find that he was right on her. Startled, she backed against the grating at the end of the landing, and he leaned in towards her, his face nearly touching hers. He flirted in a low voice, and when she mentioned his wedding band, he said it would be over soon. From then on, I did the rounds, taking Calvin with me each time. The night ended without further incident, and I left a note for our supervisor detailing what had occurred. The next night came and went with no Calvin. I did the rounds while Amira stayed in the locked office. Same thing the night after. Then on my second to last shift, I come in to find her freaking out. She found out why Calvin had not been at work. He had been arrested for murdering his wife. She had been dismembered and burned, parts of her body placed in a pond less than a mile from where we worked. That night, and the next, Amir called the jail to make sure that they were still holding him. Based on the time frame, he had killed his wife months before starting the job. Here's an article about his arrest.